Welcome to the March 2018 State of the Union on vlogging cameras from Sony and Nikon and Panasonic and Canon and where are we at? That's what we're going to talk about. Ba-boom! All right, now this video is not a video with 1,000 different chunks of B-roll showing all the different options. I also don't have 50 cameras behind my desk to pull out here and talk about it. That would just take forever. What it is it's you, and it's me explaining to you all the research that I've been through over the last couple of years. Now, unfortunately, I'm just gonna burst your bubble right now. There is not a single camera at any price point that checks off all the boxes that I think would make a perfect vlogging camera. It doesn't matter if you want to spend $10,000. There's no option. Every single manufacturer compromises on something. Now, I've used Panasonic, I've used Canon, I've used Sony, I've used Nikon. I've used those four. That's what we're talking about. Those are kind of the main major players. There is Fuji and there's Olympus and there, but we're going to be talking about those four manufacturers and kind of getting to a point of what's the best option. Now, if you don't like talking about cameras, you don't like talking about specs, you're kind of just getting into it and saying, what's my best option for a camera? Honestly, the Canon SL2, and there's a different video, I'll throw a little eye icon, why I think that's the best vlogging camera for about $1,000. There are some more compelling mirrorless options from Canon coming, but they're more money, the lenses are more money, there's less option of lenses, and so just for starting out, you can take that suggestion and move on. For the rest of you, we're going to keep going, but we got to start with what makes a good vlogging camera, and then we're going to kind of break down each brand and some of the best options in those brands, and ultimately, I think end on, I guess what I would pick today, if I had to pick something today. There's nothing that I want today, but anyway, well, we'll land on that, okay? So I think there's 5 main things that a vlogging camera needs. 1, a screen to see yourself on. That's very, very important because you want to know that your face is in focus, that the exposure is right, that the lines behind you are straight, and going on the other side of the camera coming back, other side of the camera coming back, that is a gigantic pain in the butt to do. Is it possible to do it without it? Absolutely. I do that a lot of the time. I don't always put the screen on my A6500. It does not have a selfie screen. Drives me crazy. That's 1. 2, some kind of microphone input port. Now, if you were only ever vlogging indoors in environments that weren't that noisy, you may not need it. But as soon as the wind starts picking up outside, you want to have something that has this like furry windsock and something that's a little bit more directional. So it's pointed at you so that when you're talking to the camera, it's picking up you and not everything around you. So I think that is really important. Another thing that's really important, great auto focusing. You don't want to have to worry about whether your face is in focus or not in focus, and you don't want to worry about the background being in focus and your face not. That's distracting and takes away from the story. You want whatever you want to be in focus. So great autofocusing is really, really important. Another nice thing is some kind of stabilization. So when you're walking and talking, it's not a gigantic shaky mess. So ideally the camera has in-body image stabilization, meaning that the little sensor inside of it is actually floating. Some of them use an E-stabilization where they crop in a little. That's relatively fine too. Obviously, cost. Cost is a massive factor because not everybody has unlimited money, and for a lot of people getting into vlogging, it's more of a hobby than a profession. So obviously cost of both the camera and also the lenses that you're gonna buy that you need for vlogging. There are some camera systems, i.e. Panasonic, where you can get a really cheap camera, but when you wanna buy that ultra wide angle vlogging lens, good luck. Sony's kind of the same way. And let's not forget 4K. Now, 4K vlogging, in my opinion, is a little bit of a waste of time in some senses. I have a 4K monitor. I love watching 4K vlogs. It looks amazing, but ultimately story is much more important. But, where 4K is really handy, 1, you can shoot at 4K, and even if you downsample to 1080p, it looks way better. But it's really nice when you are trying to create a visual story and you don't have another camera person operating this. So, you know, in 4K on this camera, I could punch in, or I could do like a slow little zoom, or I could fake a slide across. There's all sorts of little tricks you can do in 4K that allow you to be more flexible when you are the one in front of the camera or being filmed in, you know, in the frame, and you want to add a little bit more visual elements. So that's where 4K can be really nice. Those are kind of the main factors for what's going to make a good vlogging camera. Sensor size is maybe something we could talk about. The smaller the sensor, obviously the less light that it's going to capture, and also the less it's going to blur the background. But between Panasonic, Nikon, Canon, and Sony, the sensor, honestly, on all those cameras is big enough. Okay, so let's talk about each of the manufacturers, and let's talk about where they're at kind of in the process. So you've got Nikon, who I would say is the most behind the times out of all of these manufacturers. There's really no 4K options, you know, anywhere lower in the lineup. There's the D500, but it's got a big crop factor. Their autofocusing is not very good. They will give you a selfie screen. They will give you a microphone input. They've got a reasonably sized sensor, and their lenses are not that expensive. But if it were me, I would definitely be picking Canon over Nikon. Canon is much farther ahead in the video game. So if you have a bunch of Nikon stuff, you could look at maybe the D5600. It's got the flip out screen. It comes with one of the newer lenses, the AFP lenses. They have a stepping motor, so it's smoother autofocus. So that's really all I think that I could recommend from Nikon. All right, let's talk about Panasonic. Now, Panasonic does so many things so well. They've got the flip out screen, they've got mic input jacks, they've got great in-body image stabilization, they've got 4K in almost all of their bodies, but they just can't seem to get the focus right. They keep trying to improve it. There's this big hack out there, 179-degree shutter hack. You can Google that, YouTube that. You're going to find some ways to get the focus better, unless you shoot at 24 frames per second, which is the most kind of film-like setting. And even with that, the autofocus is better, but it's nothing like Canon or Sony. But you should be able to make it work. And the price point of Panasonic is good until you have to start buying some better lenses. Panasonic lenses, especially the good ones, they start getting really, really pricey. You want that ultra-wide angle vlogging look? You got to get the 7 to 14 millimeter, which starts at like $800. Whereas Canon, that lens is $300. Maybe not quite as good a quality, but a basic one, it's a big, big price difference. So Panasonic, what would I recommend for them? The G85, right down the middle, has great in-body image stabilization, basically does everything really well, can shoot the 4K. It's an awesome little camera. The G7, if you don't quite have the money, it drops the weather sealing and doesn't have the in-body image stabilization, but it'll go on sale for like $500 US, which is awesome. And obviously on the top end, the GH5, fantastic. Don't get the GH5S unless you're using a handheld gimbal, because it doesn't have the in-body image stabilization, which is a little bit lame. So, Panasonic. Sony! Let's talk about Sony. They have great autofocus. That was a big reason why I switched. Plus, they do 4K. They've got the microphone input jack, and their cameras, you can get the in-body image stabilization. Not quite as good as Panasonic's. Yeah, not as good, but still quite solid. The thing that they're missing is, well, the selfie screen. So that actually drives me crazy. Now, I've got this little monitor that you can put on top, but I will tell you, in some lighting situations, it casts a big shadow on your face, which is annoying. This particular one doesn't sync all that well. I break HDMI cables endlessly because of always setting it down on where the HDMI cables go. But overall, they're doing a lot of things really, really well. Now, their lenses, they are expensive. Again, we're kind of in the same range as Panasonic, where an ultra-wide angle lens for Sony, yeah, it's about $800 US, give or take a little bit. But Sigma and some of the other manufacturers are starting to get in there. Sigma actually released a 16mm f1.4, which I have. It gives you a 24mm equivalent, and it blurs the background out wildly. I don't know if you've seen some of the vlogs I've done with it. Super, super cinematic. The other thing that Sony does, which is awesome, Panasonic does it only on their highest end cameras, is shoot 120 frames per second slow motion. So you can get this really, really, really smooth slow motion with the in-body image stabilization and the amazing focus. It warms my heart. Now, for Sony, what are you going to vlog with? Well, it's a bit tough. The a6500 is probably the best option on the lower end of the budget, which still isn't all that low on that end of the budget, but because it's got the in-body image stabilization, it's got the 4K, it's got the microphone input, it's basically doing everything, but, you know, not that cheap. Not that cheap. On the cheapest end, you can get an A5100 for only $500 or $600. It's going to give you great autofocus. It only shoots 1080p. There's no microphone input jack, but you do get a selfie screen. It's like the only Sony that gives you a selfie screen. Yeah, but A6500 is kind of down the middle. On the high end, the camera that I would actually love to upgrade to is the new A7 III. Again, no selfie screen, but it improves the battery life. The screen is really nice outdoors. Full frame camera, but again, that kind of moves you up into a different price bracket completely because you got to buy full frame lenses and that's just a lot more money. But that right now, for me, on the high end, is the best all-around vlogging camera, the A7 III. Now, still no selfie screen, so, you know, I don't want to buy it, but I kind of want to buy it. Nah, it's tough. Canon, here we go, the behemoth. They autofocus really, really well. The colors on them is a bonus thing we didn't even talk about with anything else. Look real good. The lenses are super affordable as well as the cameras are super affordable. They've got tons of flip out screen options as well as microphone input jacks. They've also started their new line of mirrorless cameras, which are giving us some, you know, new and interesting options. So, you know, Canon's doing a lot of things well. It just still seems like 4K is a bit of a joke to them. It's always just like an afterthought, or you get this massive crop factor and you got to pay ridiculous amounts of money. And they won't give you something like Sony will do at a reasonable price point of getting 120 frames per second for that kind of super slow motion at 1080p. So Canon is a really good option and has been made popular by a lot of vloggers. Let's talk about, you know, a few good options for Canon. The new Canon M50 that's just announced, going to be released in a couple of weeks, might be out now depending if you're watching it, is very interesting. It's got the flip out screen. It's got a microphone that you can put on top with the microphone input jack. It's got stabilization. Now, Canon doesn't have any sort of, like the mirrorless cameras, in-body image stabilization where the sensor floats, but what they can do is kind of crop in a little bit and use some software to help stabilize the footage. It actually, you know, works pretty good. The M50 kind of checks all the boxes other than 4K. Now, it does have 4K. The crop factor is massive, and the great autofocusing doesn't work in it. So just forget that it has 4K. It's a good option. Now, the only problem with Canon's mirrorless lineup is that they have very limited lenses for it. So if you want to get into some more like compact mirrorless kind of cinematic style lenses, there's not really that great of options. And the lenses that they do have for the mirrorless system are more money than the regular Canon lenses. Now, you can use all of your Canon lenses with an adapter on the mirrorless camera, so that's great, but then you're kind of giving up the size benefits you were getting with the mirrorless cameras. So if you're moving to the regular DSLR lineup, for me, I think I mentioned this at the beginning of the video, the Canon SL2 is such a great option. It's still got the stabilization, flip out screen, microphone input jack, is not that heavy, great dual pixel autofocus, and you can get the Canon 10 to 18 millimeter ultra wide angle lens and a 50 millimeter 1.8, which is a great like cinematic style shooting lens for about $1,000 with a mic and a tripod and a memory card. And that to me is just insanely good value. The mirrorless cameras can't get there at those kind of price points, but that one can. And so I think that's a really, really good option. If you're kind of stepping up in the lineup, you've got like the new 77D, and it's kind of a more powerful SL2. It still actually has very much the same internals of the SL2, but you get a couple more screens, you get a little bit more of a robust body, you got a couple more video options. You know, it's a nice looking package. If you want to move up a step more, you've got the Canon 6D Mark II. That is a full frame camera. It is going to do better low light than the basic crop sensor lenses. Your lenses are going to get more expensive because it's a full frame camera, but if you wanted it more for the photography side, it's still got the flip out screen. It's got good autofocus. It's just, there's no 4K, and you're spending a lot of money to not have 4K and not have 120 frames per second. So it feels like, a little bit of a letdown. But that's basically the cameras that should be of interest to you. A T7i is basically an SL2. If you find a good deal on that, you can get that as well. Maybe you can get a deal on a used or a slightly older Canon M5 or M6 where they do have flip-up screens. You just got to get a bracket to be able to put a mic off to the side so that you can plug in and get that good microphone input. But yeah, that's basically Canon's lineup. With all of that said, Nikon, not really good focusing, not that great of lens options, not actually that great of video features. You've got Panasonic. They're doing everything well, but they just can't seem to get quality autofocus into their bodies. You've got Sony. They're doing many, many things well. They just won't give us a screen to see ourselves, which, again, people say you might be able to get away with that, but being able to see yourself teaches you a lot more about vlogging and speeds up the process of making vlogs. So I think that's really, really important. And Canon just can't seem to settle on giving us proper 4K. And their mirrorless is really promising, but a little bit underdeveloped right now. So what would I pick? Well, on the kind of lowest end, Canon SL2. Absolutely. That is just a great all-around budget pick. Lenses are cheap. The 10 to 18, 50 millimeter, you can get that as a kit. You're off to the races. Slightly more, Canon M50. I like that, it's adding a slightly more compact package to what the SL2 has. So kind of the size and weight of it is nice, but otherwise it's actually not really giving you anything that the SL2 doesn't have. Moving up a little bit more, my A6500. 120 frames per second, 4K, great autofocusing, in-body image stabilization. It's just really missing that flip-out screen, and there's a couple other minor things, battery life, dim screen, that actually get fixed in the A7 III, which is, I would say, my high-end pick right now. Great in low light, full frame, autofocusing is great, battery life is better, 120 frames per second, even better than this. The 4K looks great. There's so much going for that camera. If they would just give us a flip out screen, it'd be amazing. Amazing. And beyond that, I don't know why you would spend the money on really anything else for vlogging. I think as we stand today, those are the best options. But as always, your guys' comments. What do you guys think is the best all-around vlogging camera that you can get today? I'd love to hear from you. I'm Justin. Thanks for watching.